Why did you join?
I joined because I was a fairly wild kind of teenager, so I had some legal difficulties and thought it would be wise for me to find other options.
Okay. Now, why did you pick the Army?
I don't know, just
Yeah.
impulsively. I guess because the Army recruiter was in the center of Flushing, and I happened to stop in there. If it was a Navy recruit, I probably would have wanted to Navy recruit.
What were your first days in the service like?
Hurry up and wait. Lots of long lines. Clearly, the haircuts and the shots and lots of tests, as I remember. And, getting used to being with hundreds of other men.
How did it feel?
Uh, I can't say I was not really the anxious type. I guess I was curious. Um, certainly anticipatory, maybe a bit of some anticipatory anxiety. I wasn't sure what to expect. So I was pretty young. I was 19 years old at the time. So
Did you have any folks around you that had been in the military that kind of gave you an idea what to expect? Or?
no, even though my brothers both served in the military, they were a bit older than me, and at that time I wouldn't have much chance to talk with them. I had a cousin who was in the Marines. He went through a pretty grueling experience in the Marines. Matter of fact, he went through a training exercise where 6 Marines were lost in wherever the Marine camp is. I think it was Fort Lejeune or something like that. So clearly there was some expected dangers involved with training, but I wasn't sure what that would be.
When you think about basic training, what did you take away from that? What did that whole experience mean?
Well, that there was a lot of time sitting around waiting for things to happen. I mean, it was regimented, so clearly there was time spent marching and how to set up your bunk and how do you set up your footlocker and all the kinds of things that get you organized. I remember KP. Nobody wanted to really do that. And then of course the physical training. You had to go through there's 5 different, as I recall, 5 different aspects to the training. One was doing these monkey bars. One was doing a mile run. Um, and I'm just blanking on what else I had to do with it. And they made scores.
Right.
So there was that part of it. And when I was in basic training was about 8 weeks long, as I recall, something like that. And probably after about my 3rd or 4th week, I was asked to go down to my company commander's office along with several other people in my company. It was a basic training company. And was told that I qualified for OCS. Didn't know what that was. And then was told it was Officer Candidate School and asked if I was interested in it. And I said, why not? Officers seem to have a lot more power than I was seeing. And so that involved then getting interviewed by a panel of Colonel Fulbert and I think a couple of lieutenant colonels. And then going through a battery of more tests, psychological tests, all that kind of stuff. And I was accepted.
What did they ask you? What was the interview like?
I was pretty naive about politics and about the war in Vietnam. So the people who did have some college experience and were a lot more sophisticated than I was and a bit older, were telling me just to go in there and tell them to escalate the war in Vietnam. And that's what they wanted to hear.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in essence, I can't remember any of the other questions. I just remember that was one of the things I was supposed to emphasize.
So how long were you at OCS? How long does that take?
Well, I went from basic training to what's called advanced infantry training. So that was another 8 weeks or so, and it was kind of a temporary NCO as part of that training. And then also Kennedy School, I got there, I think it was in October of 66, so 6 months, I think, and then I got my commission in April
Okay.
67.
Now in '66, were you training with the M14 or the M16?
M14,
M14.
yes.
Um, did you train with the M16 and AIT or?
No. First time I had an M16 was when I got to Vietnam. I really didn't get an M16, I got an M15. It was a modified M16.
Okay.
It had a collapsible stock and had a shorter flash suppressor for officers. So I had no formal shooting training with the M16.
So how did the officer training differ from basic training?
Well, as I was showing up, there were other soldiers. Some of them had blue helmets on, and I found out that they were basically in their last stage of Officer Academy School, so they had almost all the privileges of an officer without being an officer yet. And so I got off of, I'm not sure if I took a bus or whatever. I got there and I was walking on the sidewalk with my duffel bag, and they asked if where I was going. And I said, and I showed them I had these orders to report to, I think it was Alpha Company. And the next thing I knew, they had told me to get on the ground, and I started to have to low crawl my duffel bag to the line that was waiting to sign in. So I low crawled with my duffel bag to the line, and at that point I got up and stood at parade rest as they processed one by one to get in there into the barracks. All the floors were spit shined, so you had to be aware where you were stepping because you didn't want to scuff anything up. I roomed with two other candidates, and you had to have things exactly organized in certain ways. For example, your closet had to have your fatigues, I think, was 3 inches apart. Your desk had to have your pencils in one place, and whatever you had on your desk, everything had its place. And so we used to walk on the furniture and stuff around the room, so we didn't have to worry too much about having to polish the floors. And you ran everywhere. There was no walking. So whether you were going to the bathroom or going to breakfast, you ran, as well as you ran to all your classes with gear. So and we were right next to the jump school. So right across from my barracks was the jump towers for people who were getting trained to be paratroopers. So you would get woken up in the morning about 5:30. You had to be outside by 6. We would go through the daily dozen, which is 12 different types of exercises. Then you run back in and get ready for breakfast, and then you stood in line to get breakfast. When you got into the mess hall and you got your food, you were not allowed to speak. You always had your eyes forward, and you had a tape across the front of the chair, which is about 4 inches, and that's where you had to sit on the front edge of the chair, like this. And you had to take your eyes straight ahead. Took one bite at a time. You could only glance down at your food to see how you were picking up. Otherwise, your eyes had to be straight ahead. So if you were caught what they call eyeballing, in other words, looking around the room one way or the other, you were told to get out and run a few laps around the facility and then come back. So, or do push-ups, whatever they would do to harass you in any way they could. The officers, of course, my platoon leader, then they were all newly commissioned officers who were training officers. Right? So that's who the people were in charge, as well as the XO and CO, the captain. In fact, the captain was in the Bay of Pigs invasion. He was a Cuban.
Were any of them have experience in Vietnam?
The XO did, and the captain did, not the younger officers. I think they were all second lieutenants, so no, as I recall. I don't remember. They were probably on their way at that time, but not while I was there.
What was the washout rate in OCS?
Well, some people were using it to get out of the Army, so they knew that once they got commissioned, they would have to commit another 2 years. So by the time they were getting near the end, if they did not finish, they had maybe 8 months, and then they could get out of Vietnam. So some guys would pull that off. I graduated with 176 in my class. What we start out with, I don't know, maybe around 250. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, because I've heard OCS is very difficult.
Well, you were learning tactics and you were learning discipline, and you got rotated through leadership positions, from squad leader to platoon leader to XO for a company to company commander. So everybody took a turn in one of those positions at some point during their time in OCS. And you were not only going to class, it was called the Infantry Leadership School, and you ran to everything. So, we went to class to do field assignments for tactics or new weaponry that we were introduced to, or any of that kind of stuff. So it was always something like that. And then you would take tests. And if you made mistakes or anything like that, you'd have to type up a single-spaced essay about your what you did and how you're going to correct the mistakes you made. And you had to do that on your own time, which means you probably had to do it in the latrine at night while you were supposed to be in bed, and have it handed to your platoon leader in the morning before reveille.
Oh my God, what time was reveille?
5:30.
You don't forget that, do you?
No, because I remember doing one of those papers, and I was not exactly well educated at the time, so I was not a person who really had any very good writing skills and stuff. So it was pretty laborious for me. Plus, I didn't know how to type, so that's another thing. And you couldn't have any mistakes on it. So if you mistake, you start all over again. Yeah. So it took a while.
But you're only 19 years old at this point, right?
Yes, I am.
How old is everybody else? Are they around the same age?
Well, at this point, I'm 19. Everybody else was, I'd say average age was maybe around 23, 24. So I was probably one of the youngest. I think maybe there was maybe 2 people younger than me.
Yeah. Now, the training classes that you took, do you feel that, did that really prepare you for what you ended up doing?
The discipline prepared you, the organizational stuff, learning how to pay attention to detail, learning how to delegate responsibility, learning how to take charge, how to be decisive. There are certain qualities that are inherent in leadership. How to disseminate information, how to set priorities, how to enforce and supervise people, and enforce what you wanted to have done. So in that respect, yes. I got to a point where I was pretty clear about how to handle the responsibilities of leading men. Certainly didn't feel like anything could really prepare you for war in some respects.
You felt like it prepared you to at least be a leader and...
Yeah, you had to develop really good math reading skills. For example, a big part of it was learning how to do map reading, what they call land orientation, and certain basic tactics that are basic to infantry tactics. Because I was in infantry training, I was becoming an infantry officer. So, and there are certain kinds of tactics that are pretty general. That you learn. For example, laying down a base of fire, how to cover your flanks, how to set up an ambush, and stuff like that. How to call in firepower, how to spot your position, those kinds of things.
But if you were in, when you're in combat, or you're not the only person that knows how to do that, right? Or are you?
No, well, it depends on what kind of patrol you're on.
Okay.
If you're just with your platoon, you hope that one of your NCOs can do it. If you can't, usually they can. In other words, every squad leader and platoon sergeant, you have one platoon sergeant per platoon, obviously, and then you have squad leaders, which are usually NCOs as well. We all have maps, and we're all keeping track of where we are. So if anybody, I have a radio man, and then they all have radio men. to communicate. And so if we get into a firefight, then there are certain things that we'd have to do pretty automatically. Like I said, lay down a base of fire, make sure our flanks are covered, pop out smoke grenades, because oftentimes you'd get people would start to come to see what was happening from the air. Helicopters or planes, usually have somebody flying up overhead in a live action. I mean, a firefight. So if you were calling in napalm or something, well, you want them to know where your positions were. So the smoke grenades were pretty important, in terms of color, like green grenade or purple grenade or whatever it is, so people know what your markers are. And then of course it's pretty chaotic because there's a tremendously loud volume of fire going on. So you pretty much have to know how to not only keep yourself alive. So your first instinct is hit the ground, because that's what you need to do when bullets start flying. And then to make sure of your position and to make sure you're covering your flanks and you're laying down a base of fire. So you want to do all that instantaneously almost. And then trying to figure out the situation. How much fire are you receiving? Where's it coming from? What kind of weaponry are they using? Often it was AKs and RPGs that we would face.
Did they simulate any of that in OCS?
Yeah, we would go through certain kinds of assault missions and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you graduated OCS, did you get to go home for a short time, or did you?
I went home for a short time, and then my first assignment was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where the 101st Airborne was, and I was an infantry training officer. So I was as an infantry training officer. I was not the company commander, but I was one of the lieutenants who ran basic training. So that was my job in the company, was to take the guys out and put them through training, whether it be running or whatever they were learning in basic training at that time. Yeah.
So what was it like getting your lieutenant bars?
Well, I think I was fairly proud. I was pretty young to become commissioned, which is not, that's not very common. And, I probably was not as mature as I needed to be. So there are times I probably could abuse my power. If I could, I could give recruits a pretty hard time in basic training. I was a pretty heavy stats masker. I was a disciplinarian. I drove people pretty hard. We were in Fort Campbell. It was summertime, so sometimes it got so hot we had to stop training because it got too hot. We couldn't put people out there. But overall, it was pretty straightforward. It's pretty routine stuff.
And when did you go to Vietnam? I
got orders. Let's see, I got to Fort Campbell probably in May, and got my orders maybe to go to Vietnam in September, October.
That'd be 1966?
No, that should be 67. I graduated from 67. I got commissioned in 67, April 67, and got my orders within 5 months, and was on my way to the first thing they sent me to was I went down to after I went home, I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and there we took a bus to an air base outside of Charleston, South Carolina, and flew to Panama for 3 weeks of jungle training.
What was the jungle training like?
Pretty intense. First off, to get acclimated. I mean, the thing that struck me when I got off the plane, when I was coming up to the door of the plane, as we landed about 6:30 in the morning, was the suffocating humidity and how wet it was. It was the monsoon season. It was Fort Sherman in Panama where we were going to be training, which is on the Caribbean side, and which I guess is always raining on that side. I don't know. And so the heat was the first thing you noticed, the heat and humidity. And then you did more tactics, physical training, escape and evasion kinds of tactics, map reading stuff. So you were refining your skills doing repelling, setting up things to cross rivers and streams, and doing I forgot what they call them, belay lines, but we used to swing down and hope that the guy at the end would pull on it so he wouldn't smack into the tree. So it was important. It was pretty intense. Matter of fact, when I was in Panama, they had just captured Che Guevara in Bolivia. So some of us were put on alert because he was still alive, supposedly, though he wasn't for very long. Just in case we needed to have some people go down to Bolivia, but that didn't happen. And so from when I finished the training and went from there to Panama City, and flew out of Panama City in one of these huge jumbo jets. It's the first time I've ever been on one. Which, I don't know if people are familiar with them, but they have like 2 floors.
Right.
And I can remember going up this spiral staircase to what was a bar, because back then you could smoke and drink on airplanes. Nobody had a problem. And of course, since we were at orders and we were going to Vietnam, we had a lot of drinks. And stopped in LA and then ended up in San Francisco and spent the night in San Francisco, and we left the next morning about 10 in the morning to fly out.
Were you excited, apprehensive?
Probably excited and apprehensive and hungover. And then let's see, we flew from that way. I think it was Travis Air Force Base in Oakland, and we stopped in Honolulu and Guam, and then ended up in Benoit Air Base in Vietnam. And you have to understand, we're crossing international date lines, so we're like a day later or more when we landed.
Okay, so this was in the fall of '67?
I would have gotten Vietnam probably, I think December 2nd is when I landed. So that was after 3 weeks in Panama.
Okay. And then what happened?
I waited around for close to a week to get orders, to find out where I was going to be assigned. And I was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry in the 1st Infantry Division, what they call Big Red 1.
Big Red 1, yeah, heard of it.
And so when I got my orders, I got on a helicopter for the first time in Vietnam, and found out that my battalion commander and 2 companies were at an outpost called Budap, which is right basically on the Cambodian border, and they had just undergone a ground attack the night before. So,
can I borrow that pen again?
Sure.
How do you spell Buddha?
Budap, B-O-D-O-P, 2 words, Budap.
Okay.
Which was a special forces outpost. But I was just going out there to meet my battalion commander. I remember he was a West Pointer. I knew his Mortimer. I can't remember his last name. But clearly a career soldier, lieutenant colonel. So I met with him that night. I must have flew into the base. Must have been maybe late in the afternoon. As a matter of fact, there were still bodies in the wire around the base camp and stuff like that. And I think they had killed about 110 Viet Cong. And I don't think we really suffered any casualties. It was kind of a suicide attack. And that would have been, I guess, December 67. And I was assigned to Alpha Company. And Alpha Company was out there. They had, I don't know what 2 companies were out there. I think it might have been Charlie Company or Bravo Company or whatever, but it wasn't Alpha Company. Alpha Company was back at the home base, which was Quan Loy. And just outside of Quan Loy, they were at this village called An Lac.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, An Lac is where the biggest battle of the war took place eventually. So we were straight north of Saigon on Highway 13, about 70 kilometers. And Quan Loy was an airstrip surrounded by these quite fancy, and at one time very, very exotic French chalets, because it was in the middle of a rubber plantation. And so that's where our battalion, our brigade home base was. And the brigade is bigger than the town. The brigade has 3 battalions. So our brigade had just moved there from Lai Kay, which was the initial base camp, which was really in the center of the Iron Triangle. At that time, it was known as the Iron Triangle, which at that point had been totally Rome plot. They had totally leveled the Iron Triangle, the whole area. And there was 3 points between, like, the 25th Division was further to our south. I forgot the name of their base camp, in Saigon. So that was kind of the what they call the Iron Triangle, which was just north of Saigon. So when I got there, my brigade had already moved to Quan Loy, and that's where I was most of the time when I was in Alpha Company.
Now, was that the Central Highlands?
No, this is Third Corps straight up from. First Corps was up by the DMZ. Second Corps would be the Central Highlands. Third Corps was around Saigon and north of Saigon, up what they call the Fish Hook, and Fourth Corps was the Mekong Delta.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then what happened? I mean, you were assigned a platoon?
I was assigned a platoon. I was Lima 6. They had 3 platoon leaders. Well, 4 really, but one was a mortar platoon. So there's Lima 6. Let's see. Mike 6 and November 6 were our code names. And my captain was Alpha 6. My battalion commander was Drac 6. Dracula was our code name for my battalion. We were called the Black Scarf Battalion. We were the only ones. We had black scarves, handkerchiefs that we wore around our necks to differentiate us from other units. So it had, I guess, it had quite a history, this battalion.
So when you were assigned to the platoon, I mean, what was your average? I don't know if you have an average day, but what would a day in the platoon be like?
Well, when I first took over, there were some problems with leadership, and I think that was one of the things that was changing. Alpha 6 at that time was getting relieved of his command of my company that I was coming into, and a new captain was being assigned about the same time I was being assigned. And then there were 2 other lieutenants. Another one had just come in with me about the same time. His name is Carl Perry, who I think went through ROTC. And another one by the name of O'Hara, who had also gone through ROTC. I was the only one that was not college educated. And so when I took over my platoon, I had about 28 men. Platoon sergeant 2 was a lifer, what they called lifer, because he spent most of his time in Germany. He'd never been in combat. And a couple other older NCOs, one of them by the name of Sergeant Martinez, who at the time was an E5, this was now his 3rd stint in Vietnam. And he had been in the Battle of Bulge with the 101st in World War II, and then been to Korea. And now was wrapping up his 30th year. When he was finishing up with his stint, this tour in Vietnam, he was going to be retiring.
How do you lead somebody that old and that experienced?
Well, Sergeant Martinez was a particular guy. You know, he was what we call 28-day soldier. For 28 days, he was great. In 3 days, he was drunk, which is why he was only an E5. And so, and he was a pretty sturdy guy. So he was part of my machine gun squad. So he was responsible for that squad. And in leadership, you earn your credibility by the way you carry yourself and the way you deal with your men. So when I first spoke with them, I said, "Look, I clearly not experienced, and many of you have been here for some time. Some you're going home soon." So I let them know right off the bat that I wasn't coming in to be with any kind of strong-handed attitude. I was really there to try to learn from them as much as I could to keep us all alive. And they seemed to respect that. And I was very consistent and fair-minded. So, but I was also pretty stern. I was not. You knew where you stood with me. It wasn't like a question about what I was going to do or not do.
You know, I was wondering. Well, how do you punish somebody? I mean, they're already in Vietnam.
Well, you know, when we start doing patrols, which is basically. At first, our first few patrols were around Quan Loy because it was a new brigade base camp. So there would be day patrols, and we'd go out as a company. So you just start getting used to the terrain. You get a feel for the terrain. You get a feel for how to read a map. Because the maps were really all maps that were done from air shots, so that it wasn't totally accurate. And we developed patrols. How do we call it? We did like a modified patrol setup. So each platoon would take a turn at point, depending on the day. And so I would have certain people would be my points, half of a squad, maybe 3 or 4 men. That would cut their way through wherever we were going to. We would have certain designations that we were hitting, different points, maybe 5, 6, 7, or 8 different locations. For a total of maybe 10 to 12 kilometers, depending on what we were going through. And some of it was pretty heavy jungle, some of it was swamps, some of it was rubber plantations. And we would do a dual file patrol, so that means that we would have 2 lines of men walking so that you could see each other. And then whenever the point moved out, we would sit and we would wait while the point continued to go out. And while we were waiting, we would send out covert patrols down to each side of our platoon. Each platoon would send out several guys, and they would do a cloverleaf around to make sure nobody was on our flanks until the point got to as far as where they were going to go, and they would move ahead. It was kind of like a snail,
Yeah.
that kind of patrol. And that's what you did even if you're in battalion minus or company minus. So some of the patrols are company minus, in other words, would be 2 platoons instead of 3, or battalion minus would be 2 companies instead of 3. So that's most of the patrols were like that. And then we did a number of air assaults. So we would go into LZs, landing zones that were prepped with Agent Orange and artillery before we flew in. So I only had, in all, I must have did over 30 to 35 air assaults, but I only hit 1 hot LZ in all of those air assaults. And so you go on an air assault, you go out and they'd have a patrol plan, and then we dig in for the night. So we would have to dig in bunkers and lay out wire. What that required us digging a bunker was 2 feet by 4 feet deep by 2 feet wide by 4 feet wide. And fill up sandbags and then set up portals for us to create a field of fire. Then on front of that we would lay wire. And then in front of the wire we'd lay claymores. And then at night we'd have what we call listening posts. So we'd send 3 guys out every night in front of each portion of that. If you think you have 3 platoons or 3 companies, you always have, your platoon has somebody out there, each platoon has somebody out there. And of course the problem is they would fall asleep and then you'd have to give them an R15, which means they got to cut and pay or something like that. And I had one guy that was always getting out because he was always falling asleep because he was always getting stoned on pot. So, but he was really good at leading points, so I made a deal with him. So I told him he wouldn't have to do any more LP assignments if he wanted to be on point. And so he said, sure. So he became my regular point guy.
I wouldn't think anyone would volunteer to be on point.
Well, not too many people want to be on LP either. Because you're out about 100 meters from your wire, and if you fall asleep, you might not wake up.
Did that happen?
Not to me, but it happened to some people. Not my experience, fortunately, but people have had their throats cut. Yeah.
But were the people in your platoon or no?
No.
Oh.
So you have 3 guys out there, and each taking turns. He's taking 2-hour shifts, and then we would call periodically to get the situation. They would just sit rep, and they would do a squelch. Once is okay, or twice would be there's a problem. So.
Okay. How would you find them in the dark if you needed to?
Well, I knew where they were because that's where I put them.
Oh, okay.
They didn't just go out there and wander around.
Okay.
Because if we had to bring in firepower or something, you had to know where they were.
Okay. Did you see combat?
Yeah, it was in a number of firefights. The first one, it was our first day off. Matter of fact, we had just finished doing a number of patrols around Clon Lois, so I'd been there for maybe several weeks. And every morning, they would do a mine sweep from Quan Loy, where the airstrip was, down to An Lac, where the town was, to come to Highway 13, which was the main road to Saigon and also up into Cambodia. Well, one of the mine sweep received some sniper fire, so I got a call from my captain to suit up and get out to the front gate, and so we were lead platoon to go out, and of course, the company went out to track down the snipers, which we did, and ended up killing one. The other one got away. I think it was just a couple of snipers and stuff. So that was my first firefight. And we had employed some tactics, but my company commander at the time was a bit ambitious and arrogant, to say the least. So even though he was calling for us to do certain maneuvers, he forgot what the maneuvers were supposed to be, and so he thought I was making the wrong maneuver when I was really making the right maneuver. So we were running back and forth like chickens with their heads cut off, you know. And fortunately, nobody really got hurt, so we didn't have any casualties. But soon after that, we would also fly up to this place called what was it called? Song Bay, which was it was a big airstrip which had this mountain come out of nowhere. This kind of mountain, a pile of rocks was up about I'd say about 1,000 feet or so. It's really bizarre terrain. Some of it was very pretty. And that was further north. That was just at the beginning of the highlands, again, not far from Cambodia. So we got into some fire. Matter of fact, I went out on an ambush patrol there. We got into one of the spots we were going to hit was where we started receiving some mortar fire from. We were only about 100 yards away from them. It was a night ambush that we were going out on. So I remember when we started firing back, I ended up getting a leg cramp. So I was trying to straighten out my leg cramps, and they thought I got hit, and I was trying to tell the guys I didn't get hit. I just got a leg cramp. I was trying to get my leg cramp, and it's shooting. And but they used to use 60 millimeter mortars, and so they were bombing the airstrip. And we just happened to be out there when they were bombing it, and it was our next checkpoint. So that was pretty interesting.
Interesting how?
Well, that we would coincidentally, they would be exactly where we were going to be. If they had waited 5 minutes, if we had got there before them, we would have got them. If they were there, if they did not started firing the mortars, we would have walked into an ambush. So it was, one of those things. But it got more fierce after the Tet Offensive. So a lot more fighting. And we were doing a lot of cleanup patrols north of the Iron Triangle. I lost one of my friends. He was Mike Six. His name was Lieutenant Lula. He got killed. My battalion commander, the one I was telling you about, was out there. He got killed because he went to take a look at what was going on. I got shot right between the eyes by a sniper. Lost a couple of my other platoon leader. Lost his platoon sergeant. So we probably had about 8 killed. Maybe 10 wounded on that day. And then the next day we went out because we had come up on a base camp that had just been abandoned, matter of fact. It was really amazing, the base camp, the intricacy, the difficulty in seeing them, the bunkers and everything else. But the ambushes were taking place out of spider holes. And I could see where one of the spider holes where somebody was shooting from, so I ended up trying to get the guy out of the spider hole and was able to get that person. And that's why I got a Bronze Star. Not that I did anything brave, it's just a matter of positioning, really.
It was the Vietnamese in a spider hole.
And he got up, and I saw him, and and fired on him. Though he looked like he was an advisor from China, because he was a lot bigger than most Vietnamese were. He looked like he was at least 6 foot, and fair in complexion. So that was. I remember talking to intelligence about that, because it looked like it could have been a Chinese advisor, or it could have been maybe an advisor from Russia who was from Mongolia. For all I know, I don't know who the hell he was. The next day, lost my other friend, Lieutenant. Carl. So 2 of my closest friends were dead in 2 days. That was pretty hard for me to take.
How did you cope with that?
I was pretty angry. I understood at this point now, I've been in the country this would have been around April. So I've been there for 4 months, starting to get a bit more combat savvy. I had a new company commander, the other one got relieved. So he had never been in combat, and so didn't know exactly what to do. He stopped me from doing some things I felt I needed to do, which might have saved some lives, so that was a problem for me. And he called them search and destroy missions. And in essence, it was really going out and getting shot at so they could find out where they were. So we were taking casualties here and there. It was kind of, it was guerrilla warfare tactics. So it's hit and run, hit and run, hit and run. And so you realize that you're kind of even putting out in pretty compromising situations, because they know where they are, and we're just trying to figure out where we are. So I was really upset the second time. At the end of the second day, when Lieutenant Perry went down, I was the last platoon. There was a platoon in front of him. That was O'Hara, and him and I didn't get along too well. He was Mike 6, and Lieutenant Perry was November 6. I was Leo 6. And so, they had come by on our flanks and shot into our patrol. He got hit. So my company commander didn't seem to not really know what to do, and so I moved up and got to his position. And I heard that Lieutenant Perry got hit, so I continued to move up and found him. He had gotten hit on the side. Part of his face was blown out. And he was still alive. And his medic was tending to him. And I was thinking that he had to get some morphine, and I realized he had a head wound, so we couldn't give him morphine. And then I went ahead to the next platoon and got to Lieutenant O'Hara's position. He was stupid. They were very close friends, even more so than I was with him. So he was pretty much in shock. So I took over a point with several of my guys and got us to a clearing to get the wounded and killed out. Basically, they were dead by that point, because most people ended up dying of shock. So we got them out with the helicopters, and then I got us back to our base camp. And when I got to base camp, I was pretty mad. So, as a matter of fact, the company I was standing down, Charlie Company, their captain was trying to tell me to calm down, and I was really expressing myself. Let's put it that way.
I can only imagine.
And then it wasn't long after that I became. By that time, I was almost. So I've been there after about 5. The highest ratio for casualties were really infantry lieutenants. So, at the end of April, I'm probably almost a ranking lieutenant. I'm the ranking lieutenant in my company. So I become the XO for the company. And so that means I didn't have to go out on patrol. I would sort of stood back and make sure the chow was served and all that kind of stuff. Took care of more administrative, logistical stuff is what the XO does for a company. So I did that just for a little while. And ended up being assigned to be a training. They were needing somebody to go out and do some training for a Vietnamese regiment. And since I was the XO back in the rear, they asked me to go see if I could do a presentation. And I did in front of my brigade commander and his XO, and they liked my presentation, the way I did the presentation. So I went off with a captain, nice guy, and 4 NCOs, and we went to Vietnamese regimental base camp further south, not far from YK, the town I was telling you about before, and spent several weeks training them in infantry tactics.
What was your opinion of the Army?
I got to pretty close with some of the lieutenants. One of them spoke English pretty well. They were teaching me a little bit of Vietnamese. Some of them certainly came from some wealth. I remember one of them telling me, if you ever come to Saigon, come and visit my family compound, basically. As if I could find it. Yeah, so sure, next weekend. So I befriended some of them, and what struck me, of course, is that I would give a lecture from 10 to 12. They'd have lunch, and then they napped. Everybody would put up hammocks. All of them would put up hammocks and stuff until 3, and then we go back and then we practice the tactics. I taught them until about 5, and then came back.
Now, when you were leading a group of men in combat, how did you maintain morale, or what was the morale like?
I had to say the men I was with, it's probably the hardest thing is that the people you are with in combat become people you develop tremendous respect for because of their bravery, their camaraderie, they're looking out for each other. You're basically equals. So obviously people have rank. So I think that morale was, there was still lots of questions about the war. You have to understand that a lot was happening back here that we weren't aware of. And I was there in 1968, for most of 1968, and this country was going through a lot of changes at that point. So as the year wore on and we started feeling more and more the futility of what we were doing, I think morale started being more and more affected. I didn't have to deal too much of that because after I was exec and went on that assignment, then I got some special orders because they had a PX officer, another lieutenant who had absconded with like $50,000. And so I got a special assignment to go try to find him and investigate what happened to the money. And so I went down to Saigon. He was in what they call MAG-V, which is an advisory group to the Vietnamese. And I went to MAG-V headquarters to find out where he was. And I found out he was in some kind of little hamlet out in the Mekong Delta somewhere. That took, the only way we could get out there was once a week in a helicopter that dropped off whatever supplies they needed for the week. So I went to Vung Tau instead, which was in country R&R place. Had a little fun. And needless to say, I couldn't really find him. And so I got back, my XO for my brigade was really pissed off with me because he felt like I didn't make enough effort. I mean, I could have traveled anywhere because I had orders, so I could go all over the place.
Yeah.
But
was the guy ever found?
I don't. When you're an officer, you kind of expect to be able to do almost anything. I remember defending a guy in the court martial. I mean, I wasn't like, you're going to be the defense lawyer for this kid. Okay. Stuff like that. And I participated in the court martial. A guy who was threatening one of his NCOs for insubordination. Anyways, soon after that, things were getting pretty intense, and I was back out as an XO with the whole battalion up in Loc Ninh, which is only about maybe 8 kilometers from the Cambodian border. And that was a place we were receiving artillery fire from Cambodia, but we couldn't retaliate, so that was a problem. So a new division commander took over. His name was General Ware, who flew into our base camp to meet, obviously, our battalion commander and to scope out the situation tactically and militarily. And what was striking about him is that he had 2 German Shepherds that accompanied him, and he had 2 of these pearl-handled 45s. So he had been our division commander for maybe several weeks at most. But as he's leaving our position, they received some fire, and the last thing we heard was him telling his pilot to take a closer look. And and they were blown out of the air. So we had to set up a quick patrol about, we kind of knew what was going to happen when we heard that. So he was gone. The whole helicopter got blown to bits. We had to try to retrieve what we could. And then the day, I'm not sure if it was the day before, it's kind of blurry to me. Another captain went down. So the captain who was the S3 Air, who was the assistant operations officer for the battalion, had to take over that company because I was the ranking lieutenant in the battalion at that point. They asked if I would be the S3 Air. So even though I was a lieutenant, I was in the captain's slot and became the assistant operations officer for the battalion. And that's what I did until the time I left Vietnam.
And what was that like?
I was responsible for designing patrol plans, coordinating that, all the firepower, coordinating how many helicopters you're going to need for an air assault, what backup artillery we would have, where the patrol would be, getting support, and whatever was needed logistically for carrying out the mission was my job.
Okay.
So I make all those arrangements.
When you're out on patrol and you have to call in close air support, I mean, how do you do that? I mean, I've seen napalm dropped and it's kind of messy. I mean, how do you make sure?
Well, you don't use napalm too often in the middle of the jungle. You tend to use it when you're in an area where you have what we call a wood line, so that you can see where it's going to hit depending on where you're receiving fire from, because it's much more hazardous to step out into open paddies and rice fields than it is when you're walking through. Not that it's not hazardous in the jungle, but
yeah. You
can imagine trying to call on a napalm strike in triple count 3 force is not a wise thing to be doing. So it's more when you're okay. There's some. You're receiving fire from maybe a wood line, whatever. Or if you're coming into an LZ position, in a hot LZ, and so you can have them drop a napalm strike. The jets come in real close, so they come out of nowhere and they drop, and then before you know it, the napalm's hitting the ground and they're already out of there. And so the napalm hits, and you see the jets already gone. And it's rolling hell. Okay, there's no other way to say it. It's just a big ball of fire, intense heat, and just whatever it's in his way gets suffocated, burnt up. So I only took part in a couple of those, but most of the time it was really more artillery support. So when you're calling an artillery battery is 6 guns, either 185s or 155 howitzers. So if you have a map, then you have certain code words you're using for your location, going off the grids of where the map is, and it might be birds. So you say robin, okay, plus 2.5 clicks, east, 1.5 clicks north, whatever. I can't. Yeah. It's hard to remember some of that, and so you try to give your position. So you have a spotter that confirms your position with the color smoke, and then you ask him to fire around. Okay, I might say, okay, from my position where I think I am, I'm not telling him that, but from this position, well, let's say 215 degrees plus 500. And then what I'm doing is asking him to drop in a round from what I think is my location at this compass reading, 500 meters out. And you see where the round drops. And then you walk it in from there, or figure out if you're off. And it dropped over there. You realize, oh shit, okay, so now let's move it over this way. Now it's 318 degrees. Drop it 200. Okay. And then when you feel like you got a target, you say let it go. And what you mean by let it go, because you have an FO with you. So I'm not really doing that unless I'm by myself. We have a forward observer from the artillery battery that's with us. He's a lieutenant. That's his job. And unfortunately, the one we had up in Anlock dropped in a battery on top of our position. So we lost a lot of guys that I knew from my company. I was out on a patrol that day because I had just taken over S3 Air. It was the first time I was not going to be out there. As the first day I took over as S3 Air. And on 185 rounds came in on our position, which means that's 6 guns firing 6 rounds apiece. So you got 36 rounds coming in on that position when they say let it go. That's what you're doing. So it just takes everything apart. So lost some very good men. And,
did you see a lot of friendly fire because of that, or?
I would say probably about 30 to 40% of our casualties from friendly fire.
Pretty high.
Yeah, that's part of the morale issue. And of course, MIAs are a problem. So one guy went missing. I don't know what happened to him. One of the people they brought back, I thought I knew who he was, and then I reached in his pocket, pulled out his dog tags, and I realized it was his last patrol. He was going home the next day. He was my company commander's rig operator. So that was hard for me. And then we moved to further south again, and one of the captains came down with malaria. So my battalion commander asked me to take over his company for a night patrol. So I went out on a night patrol with a company of men, which is somewhere around, 150 guys with me. And you're going out just before it gets dark. And obviously I don't know everybody, but I'm just in charge. And what happened was the guys at the end of the patrol, as we were waiting for the point to go out, got hit. And so I lost 2 guys and got 8 wounded. So I had to compromise my position because I had to bring in some helicopters to take the bodies out. And so we had to change where we were going to go for our patrol. I wasn't sure who hit us. I'm not sure if it was South Vietnamese soldiers who mistook us, or if it was, Viet Cong or NBA. We started to see more NBA or regular Vietnamese Army, North Vietnamese Army. So my battalion commander liked the way I handled the situation. And I remember as I'm getting ready to leave Vietnam, we were sitting down at the officers' club, and he talked to me about it. And he was asking if I would just consider going home for 30 days and coming back and taking over one of his companies. And I said, well, I'll tell you the truth, sir. I'm really more of a lover than a fighter. And in my own thinking, clearly if I wanted to make a career out of the military, getting what it amounts to a battlefield promotion is pretty significant. But I'd never been to college, I saw the war deteriorating pretty badly. There's no guarantee of where I was going. I mean, I would have came back to this company. They went right up to the Cambodian border right after I left. They were up in the Fishhook. Some pretty major battles. I can remember being up there before I left, and we had B-52 strikes hitting within about 3 kilometers of our position. And that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
A B-52 strike is 6 B-52s dropping 30 1,000-pound bombs apiece at once. So that's 180 bombs coming down at once. And they fly 6 sorties. Okay? So think about that happening 6 times in a row. And so you can see as they flash across the horizon, the bombs dropping, and then all of a sudden the whole earth trembles, and then you hear it, depending on how far you are, and you can figure out how far you are by just how long the noise takes to get to you. That was my last time out in the field. I'll never forget that. It was all up by the Fishhook. And they had these major B-52 strikes coming in that they're trying to, pretty close to, I'm sure, the Ho Chi Minh Trail at that point. And then I went home. I went to Fort Devens.
Now, what'd you think of the NDA Viet Cong in terms of their capabilities and tactics?
Tremendous soldiers. Very shrewd, very hard fighters. Tell you the truth, you want them on your side if you're in a war. They knew what they were doing. And pretty brave. Some clearly suicidal. Yeah.
Did you see any problems with the M16? Because if you were there fairly early,
my platoon was one of the. My battalion was the one that was on CBS News before I got there about 6 months earlier. They were the ones that had their M16s jammed. in a firefight. What was happening was if you had a full magazine, one round would not eject before the other round was going into the chamber, and they would jam. So what we did to compensate is that we loaded our magazines with 18 rounds instead of 20, and that seemed to solve the problem.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Now, when you left Vietnam, where did you go next? Where did you?
I did it at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Even though it was not an infantry place, I pretty much I had 4 months left in the Army.
But you didn't go straight to Fort Devens,
Well, I came home and went home for some leave, but then I went to Fort Devens.
Okay.
And was there until I got out of the Army.
Now, how did the country change? What did you see?
Well, while I was born, let's see, Martin Luther King got assassinated, went through the Tet Offensive, Johnson stopped the bombing of Hanoi, Robert Kennedy got assassinated, they had a big riot in Chicago, and Nixon got elected, all while I was gone. And the last thing I was listening to the Four Tops, and I came back, people were listening to Eric Clapton and Cream. So it was a bit of culture shock.
But when you came back, were you in uniform? Did you encounter any?
I didn't really, I came back in uniform to Travis Air Force Base. I flew into New York overnight and took they dropped me off. I came in with some friends. His family picked me up at the airport. They dropped me off at Grand Central. My family didn't know I was coming home yet. And it was just before Thanksgiving, matter of fact. And I just called my folks when I landed at the train station. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning. So nobody really saw me in uniform, really. So I didn't have too much of a hassle with that. But I think people, when they found out I was a Vietnam veteran, you can clearly see that they were not comfortable being around you. And I was, you still have a major startle reflex. So I can remember, for example, being balloon would pop and I'd be hitting the ground, that kind of stuff. So it took a while to get adjusted.
Does that still happen?
Sometimes, yeah.
Was there anything that you did or anything that brought you good luck while you were there? I mean, did you?
I had a great NCO. His name was Sergeant Vega from the Philippines, who had fought the Japanese as a teenager in World War II, who served in some respects as my mentor. I had a high amount of respect for him. My men loved him. Made him my platoon sergeant, got rid of the other one. And so and he was a pretty important person in my life.
Do you ever see any of the people that you served with?
No, I lost all my. One night I'd gone out to the officers' club. We were standing down in Lai Khe, where the Lai Khe was around this village inside a base camp, and I went to the officers' club and got pretty drunk, and snuck into the village. So I got back maybe about 5:30 in the morning, and I was about to lay down on my bunk, and I remembered that one of the captains told me he had a bed in the other room because he was going to be in Saigon that night. So I got up and went in and lay down in his bed, and about an hour, maybe about just after I fell asleep, a big, huge explosion went off. And the way they did it, they put a shape charge underneath the corner of the hooch where I was. So everything I had, all my belongings were gone. Camera, pictures, anything. And there was nothing left. Uniforms, everything was gone.
Oh my God.
So, including addresses, the whole 9 yards.
Has anybody contacted you or?
No, I don't know if they could find out where I was.
Have you ever been to the Vietnam Memorial?
Yeah, a few times.
What's that been like?
Very, very moving. It's very hard for me to go there and not cry. It's humbling. And of course, I looked up names of people I knew. Still trying to track down someone I went through OCS with. We both had the same birthday. His name is Philip Duncan. Still haven't been able to find him. He went through OCS with me. He ended up in the 1st Cavalry Division. But,
I'm thinking back. I remember a story you told me about going to college, but your grades being sent to your parents. Like you couldn't get the grades or something like that because.
Yeah. I started college here at Southern.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as a freshman, so yeah, I remember that they sent my midterm grades to my parents. I was laughing about it. My parents wouldn't even be able to understand it. Everyone didn't. My mom went as far as 8th grade. My father never went to college. So it was funny to me.
Well, I think what was funny to me was that you'd led troops in combat, but somehow your parents need to look at your
Well,
grades.
because that was a freshman, so they just assumed I was an 18-year-old. They didn't know that I was a veteran. So.
We'll just have a couple of last questions. Did you join any veteran organizations?
The VFW,
Okay.
and I'm in the process of changing to the one in my town now. Old Saybrook. I used to be the one in Wallingford, and then the one in Pawcatuck. And the Society for the Big Red One has a newsletter, so I kind of keep tabs on that.
Okay. Do you, when you see other Vietnam veterans, do you guys talk about Vietnam at all, or is...
Not much. I don't run into them too much because I don't have time. I work a lot, so. But yeah, we might tell some more stories for sure, but more about the kinds of fun stuff, nothing about things we don't want to talk about. I guess.
Let me see. And I think this is a good question. How did that, the experience in the service, how did it, shape your life? What?
Well, without realizing it, it took years for me to recognize that I was suffering from PTSD, and didn't realize that the longer you're not aware of it, the worse it really is. So I was initially diagnosed only about 10 years ago. So, how did it shape my life? Jeez, when you come back from Vietnam, it's hard to deal with the certain aspects of everyday life that's kind of mundane. When your adrenaline's pretty pumped up. So I put myself in some pretty high risk situations when I was younger. I won't get into more detail on that. But I'm still here, so I survived it. So I'm sure it affected that. It certainly affected my ability to get close to people in some respects. I had a hard time dealing with that.
What do you think's the positives from it? Are there any?
For me, it's very clear what is involved in leadership, and I see a tremendous vacuum of leadership everywhere I've worked, for the most part. I only have maybe a couple of people I've worked with now in my career that I would say were decent administrator leaders. I've had positions of leadership myself in my field, so that's probably the biggest thing I learned is how to be a leader. And probably more compassion, more self-reflection, modesty.
Any regrets?
People who I lost, yeah. We lost a lot of people from my generation that I think were kind of the cream of the crop. So yeah, to me that's very tragic.
It is tragic.
Yeah, because and I'm sure most people who in combat would say the same thing about the guys they were with. I would say I'd serve with the best. They would probably say they serve with the best. Americans as soldiers are the best in the world. I have no doubt about that.
Is there anything you want to add for this interview?
All I can say is I hope that this is of some use to someone. That you find what I had to say in some ways meaningful.
I think it will be, and
willing to make a contribution any way I can.
Well, we appreciate it.
And I want to say war is hell, so don't just do it lightly, And unfortunately, I think we put ourselves in some situations over the past 10 years that were not necessary militarily, and it's taken a great toll on a lot of people's families. And certainly the soldiers coming back will never be the same. You're never the same. Combat changes you forever. That's all I can say.
Well, thank you for your service,
Thank you, George.
and appreciate it. And we appreciate you taking the time to do this. This is important.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.